Silver Creek, Oregon, was a town wrapped in stillness, the kind that lulled its residents into believing nothing truly terrible could happen there. Pines stretched tall like sentinels, the scent of resin sharp in the morning air. The wooden houses bore peeling paint and stories long forgotten, standing just far enough apart to hide what went on behind their walls. Mark often thought this quiet was the perfect backdrop for his life, a marriage that seemed steady, a son whose laughter filled their home, a wife who moved through the rooms like sunlight, solid, dependable, safe. On that particular Saturday, sunlight poured into the kitchen in fractured beams, glinting off the kettle and dancing across the wood grain of the table. Mark sat in his usual chair, a mug cooling by his hand, the local paper open but unread. His ears were tuned to the sound of Ethan rummaging through Claire's tote bag on the counter, humming a tune only children know. He was searching for candy, a treasure hunt he performed almost every weekend. "Got it," Ethan exclaimed, his small fingers clutching something he believed was a prize. Mark glanced up, expecting to see a wrapper crinkle. Instead, the boy held out a folded sheet of paper, crisp and white, with a gold-embossed logo at the top that gleamed like an omen. "What's this?" Mark asked casually, though a knot had begun to form low in his stomach. Ethan climbed onto the chair beside him, placing the paper flat with the reverence of a secret revealed. "Dad, look, I think Mom is planning a surprise trip for you." His eyes sparkled with delight, his voice ringing with pride. That innocence, pure, unguarded, cut deeper than any sharp word ever could. Mark forced a smile, the kind that felt borrowed. He ruffled Ethan's hair. "A surprise? Huh, that's sweet." His voice sounded to his own ears like someone else's, light and airy, while inside, the weight pressed down. He unfolded the receipt carefully, as if opening a love letter. The Fairmont Hotel in Portland, a name that once held memories of weekend getaways and whispered promises. He could almost feel those memories trying to resurface, sweet and aching, for a brief, fragile heartbeat. He wanted to believe Ethan's story, that Claire had planned something beautiful for him. Then his eyes fell on the date. Wednesday, the same Wednesday Claire had left with a kiss on his cheek, saying she was headed to a conference in Seattle. The same night she called with a voice muffled by distance, saying she was exhausted and going to bed early. Mark's fingers curled around the receipt, the paper crackling in protest. He felt the blood drum in his ears, but he kept the smile fixed, because Ethan was watching. "Wow," he said softly, and the warmth he forced into the word nearly broke him. "That's really nice of her." Ethan beamed, satisfied with his discovery, and ran off to the backyard with his toy plane, his laughter trailing behind him like a thread of sunlight. He had no idea what storm he had unleashed with that innocent gesture. Mark sat motionless, the receipt burning against his skin as if it carried its own heat. Anger didn't come, not yet. What came instead was the slow, suffocating dread of a man who suddenly realizes the foundation under his feet might already be cracked. He turned to the window, watching Ethan soar his plane through the air, laughing freely, untouched by the shadows creeping into their world. In a voice barely more than breath, so quiet that even the walls couldn't hold it, Mark whispered to the empty room, "Please, God, let me be wrong." Silver Creek wrapped itself in winter mist the week Mark learned how to hide his own heart. The mountains looked the same, the streets just as quiet, but something inside his home had shifted in ways no one else could see. The receipt still lived in his wallet, a folded shard of truth he carried like a wound. Each time he touched it, his fingers trembled, not with rage, but with the weight of knowing. He didn't ask Claire about it, not when she came home smiling, not when she kissed his cheek and spoke of deadlines. He let her words spill like water over stone, smoothing away nothing. That night, and the nights after, he played the role of the husband who didn't notice how her phone stayed face down, how she left the room to answer texts, how the warmth between them had become a polite shadow of itself. Business trips multiplied, her suitcase rolled across the floor more often. Her perfume lingered only long enough to remind him she was gone again. Mark watched quietly, gathering pieces she never meant to drop. Receipts, emails left open for a breath too long, traces of hotel bookings that didn't align with the places she claimed to be. He pieced them together like a man assembling a puzzle whose image he feared to see complete. The house at night was his confessional. Curtains pulled back, pine trees swaying under the moon. He sat by the window with a laptop glowing cold against his face. His searches were methodical, fingers tense, heart pounding against the silence. The clues were everywhere once he allowed himself to see them: credit card charges, overlapping dates, and emails hidden in plain sight. Words typed to someone else. Soft words meant for no one in this house. He printed an invoice from the hotel, one that listed 2 guests. The paper felt alive in his hands. Warm from the printer, the smell of ink sharp. It mocked him with its certainty. There was no room left for denial, only the kind of clarity that cuts so deep it almost feels clean. Mark returned to his journal each night. The leather cover creaked as if it knew the burden it was about to hold. His handwriting changed with each entry, shaky, then sharp, then heavy. On one page he wrote, "She's still here physically, but somewhere along the way, she left." He stared at those words for a long time. They were not an accusation, they were an epitaph for something already dying. When morning came, Claire's smile at breakfast looked perfect. But as he watched, it slipped the moment she looked away. His own smile did the same. And neither of them spoke of it. The morning the email arrived, the sky above Silver Creek was a washed-out gray, as if even the weather understood what was coming. Mark had reached out days earlier to an old acquaintance who worked at the Portland hotel. The man owed him a favor, one small enough to ask and heavy enough to break a heart. When the reply came, it was brief, almost careless, a single attachment, a blurred photo taken from a security camera. He opened it slowly, his breath shallow. There she was, Claire, her hand tangled in the hand of another man. They weren't kissing, they weren't even looking at each other in that frozen frame, but the way her fingers curled into his, the way her body leaned toward him with the ease of someone who belonged there, that was enough. Sometimes betrayal isn't in what's done but in how naturally it fits. Mark stared at the screen for a long time, his pulse calm in the way of someone past shock. The anger he expected never came. No shouting, no urge to smash the laptop against the wall. Only a deep, quiet grief that hollowed him from the inside, leaving his chest feeling cavernous and cold. He closed the photo and, with it, a chapter of his life he would never get back. That evening, while the house settled into its nightly rhythm of creaks and sighs, Mark gathered everything: the receipts, the emails, the hotel invoice, and finally, that single photograph. He copied them onto a small black USB drive, each file a fragment of a truth he no longer needed to prove. This was not for a fight. This was for an ending. On the desk in his study, under the yellow glow of the lamp, he placed the USB on top of a manila envelope. Inside was the divorce petition he had drafted quietly with the help of a lawyer friend. His handwriting scrawled across a single note attached to it. "You can love someone else, but don't let our son believe he gave me a gift when he handed me proof." He read those words again, the weight of them pressing into his fingers. They weren't cruel, they weren't meant to wound. They were the simple truth. The last thing he had left to give her: clarity. Down the hall, Ethan was asleep, clutching his toy plane against his chest. Mark stepped into the doorway and watched him for a moment, memorizing the peace on his son's face. This was what he needed to protect, not his pride, not his marriage, but the small boy who had unknowingly placed the first stone on this path. Mark turned off the light, leaving the room in darkness. Tomorrow, he would hand Claire the envelope. There would be no yelling, no accusations, only silence, the kind that ends things more completely than words ever could. Ethan didn't notice the quiet at first. Kids rarely do. They live in their own worlds, where the only storms are the ones outside the window. But soon he began to sense it, the way voices in the house became softer, the way doors closed without slamming, the way his father's shoes stopped resting by the front door. One night, He wandered into the hallway and saw that his mom was sleeping in the guest room. The door was half open, a cold light spilling onto the carpet. She turned her head quickly when she saw him. "Go back to bed, honey," she whispered. Her smile was too quick, like a shadow trying to look like sunlight. The next morning, Mark wasn't at the breakfast table. Ethan found him instead loading boxes into the trunk of the car. "Where are you going, Dad?" he asked, clutching the hem of his pajamas. Mark crouched down, brushed his hair back, and said, "Just staying somewhere closer to work for a little while." He smiled, but his eyes didn't. Ethan's small chest tightened with a fear he couldn't name. That night, lying awake, he remembered the piece of paper he had found, the hotel receipt he thought was a surprise gift. The memory weighed on him. Maybe that paper had done something bad. Maybe he had. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked his mother the next day. His voice trembling. Claire froze, her hands still on the dish she was washing. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on a towel. "No, sweetheart, this is just adult stuff. Nothing to do with you." Her voice cracked on the last word. Ethan nodded, but he didn't believe her. Children have a way of knowing when adults are lying, not because of the words, but because of the spaces between them. That night, he sat at his desk, crayons scattered around him, and drew a picture. In it, 3 figures, Mom, Dad, and himself, held hands under a bright blue sky. Everyone was smiling. He colored it carefully, pressing hard enough that the wax nearly broke. When the house was dark, he tiptoed down the hall and placed the drawing outside the door of the room where his father was sleeping. Then he ran back to his own bed, hiding under the covers as if that could keep the world together. In the morning, Mark opened the door to find the picture waiting like a message from a world he was losing. He picked it up, his hand trembling. The smile stared back at him, drawn in the bold certainty only a child can believe in. His eyes burned, and for a long time he just stood there, the picture fluttering slightly in his hand. He didn't call Ethan, he didn't wake him, he didn't say a word, because some truths, when spoken, only make the pain sharper. Instead, he folded the drawing gently and slipped it into his journal, pressing it between the pages like a fragile leaf that might crumble if held too tight. Winter clung to Silver Creek like an unwelcome guest, its frost settling not only on the rooftops but also in the spaces between Mark and Claire. The cold outside seemed to seep into their home, into every conversation reduced to logistics, into every glance that looked past instead of toward. Ethan, too young to name what he felt, sensed it in the way the house no longer hummed with warmth. He stopped asking questions aloud, retreating into a quiet so deep it felt as though he was holding his breath, hoping that silence might patch what words could not. The school auditorium smelled of wood polish and anticipation. Children laughed in clusters, their instruments clutched like treasures. Parents filled the seats, their faces lit with pride. Ethan stood backstage with his violin, tiny hands tightening on the bow, when his teacher knelt beside him and asked gently, "Who's coming to hear you play?" "Sweetie." Ethan hesitated. The other children had shouted their answers: Mom, Dad, Grandma, everyone. Ethan stared at his shoes, then whispered, "I just want them to talk to each other, even if it's not about me." The teacher blinked back tears, her smile faltering. Later that night, she called Mark. Her voice was careful, yet her words fell like stones. "Ethan is hurting. He wants you and Claire to stand in the same room, even for a moment, and remember you're both his parents." On the other end of the line, Mark listened with his jaw clenched and eyes burning. He thanked her, but when he hung up, the apartment's silence swallowed him whole. He sat for hours in the dim light of his rented place, the city's muffled hum outside. Opening his journal, he felt the leather's worn edge under his fingers. He wrote slowly, every letter pressed hard enough to tear the page. "I don't hate her, I just hate that she made our son the messenger of her betrayal." The words bled into the paper, heavy as the grief pressing against his ribs. He closed the journal, but the pain did not close with it. Ethan's plea haunted him, the simple wish of a child who wanted only to see his parents share the same space without anger. The innocence of that wish was what broke Mark most. That night, as he sat with his head in his hands, he realized the wound was no longer his alone. It had spread, bleeding into Ethan's laughter, into the way he held his violin, into the memory of a recital where love should have been the only thing in the room. And no matter what Mark did from this point on, some stains were beyond washing away. Years later, the sharp smell of pine from Silver Creek had faded in Ethan's memory. But not the weight of what happened there. In a therapy group in Denver, surrounded by strangers who were learning to speak their own truths, he finally let his own story spill into the room. He spoke calmly, as if narrating someone else's life. When I was 9, I found a receipt in my mom's purse. I thought it was for a surprise trip for my dad. I gave it to him, smiling, thinking I'd done something good. The group listened, the silence between their breaths heavy. Ethan's voice softened. That piece of paper, it wasn't a gift. It was the beginning of the end. That night I heard my parents' voices in separate rooms. Later, I saw my dad's eyes, how he tried to smile at me. But it was like something inside him had already collapsed. He told them about the empty house, the violin recital where he wished only to see them talk, and the day his dad moved out. Every detail clung to him like shadows that never quite disappeared. I thought I caused it, he admitted. For years, I thought it was my fault. He looked down at his hands, twisting the ring he wore out of habit. Though it meant nothing. I don't hate my mom. I don't even hate what happened. But I remember every detail. The receipt, my dad's red eyes, and the house that stopped feeling like home. Those things stay. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. I couldn't even read the whole receipt back then. But I understood the part nobody wanted to say. The room stayed silent, not with discomfort, but with the weight of truth everyone recognized. Ethan exhaled, as if finally setting down a burden he had carried far too long. Infidelity doesn't just shatter marriages. Sometimes it shatters the one thing a child believed could never break, their family.